Okay, let's get into today's show. Today is a special one. Today is our one burning question series. We're doing it all of this week since everyone is reporting to camp. Players, rookies being signed.
In theory.
All at once. In theory, kind of training camp is starting July 28th. I mean, that's at least when people are reporting. Then there's going to be strength and conditioning, some acclimation periods, but whatever. We're just going to go with everything is starting on time because that's what it appears so. But since we've had this entire summer to talk about so many players and teams, we still do have, again, one burning question to ask about every single team as we approach the start of the 2020 season. And today is the AFC. How we're going to structure this, about 3 minutes per team. Each of us has 4 teams of the 16 in the AFC. We're going to start off with the AFC North. Hayden Winks, you're up first with the Baltimore Ravens, which in some ways had the player who defined the 2019 season in Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time on this podcast talking about the passing offense, how much Lamar Jackson is going to regress in 2020. But I want to shift over to the running back. So my burning question is, can J.K. Dobbins overtake Mark Ingram's job? So last year, Mark Ingram was the RB12 on a per-game basis, averaged about 16 fantasy points per week. But I think that J.K. Dobbins is the better talent at this point. Mark Ingram's kind of going out of his peak career, and J.K. Dobbins was so electric at Ohio State last year, 2,000 rushing yards. I think he's just a better player, and he's a little bit cheaper in fantasy drafts right now. Mark Ingram's the RB29. J.K. Dobbins is the RB30. I want to be higher than consensus on both of these players just because the offense is so much better. So it's just kind of, when is Dobbins going to take over? Is that going to be in week 4? Is it going to be in 2020? Or is it going to be week 12? Who knows?
I mean, it's going to be, he's one of the many rookies who I think in a normal offseason would immediately be slotting into a bigger role. But with just an offseason where we had 0 live reps, that works in Mark Ingram's favor, who, in Mark Ingram's defense, did make the most of a good situation last year, over 1,000 yards again, over 5 yards per carry again, and, his awesome setup with the offensive line paving lanes and Lamar Jackson taking away defensive attention. But yeah, on all rookies, I'm going to be skeptical kind of this year. And Dobbins, where it's just kind of a luxury. I mean, the Ravens do not have to force the issue there. I wouldn't be surprised if it was more like middle of the season, second half of the season, if we see a changing of the guard there at all. So yeah, I would guess later.
I will be higher on Dobbins because he's the more explosive player at this young stages of his career. And the Ravens still have that team-friendly out. They can get out from Mark Ingram's contract next year for $1.3 million in dead cap space as opposed to $3.1 as it is this year. The issue is, how much does he linger around in Dobbins' rookie season, as Hayden talked about? And that's where I'm concerned, because it doesn't seem like he's going away. Like, this is also a player the guys just love in the locker room. Like, he's the one who shows up to all the press conferences and makes jokes about everyone. So I am still concerned that even if it's for a dwindling, like 8 to 10 touches per game, the fact is he's there enough to disrupt Dobbins' volume.
I'm sure this is going to be a talking point that we have multiple times today, but just the complete lack of preseason games is going to eliminate the hype of a lot of these rookies. I mean, I think we all remember the one Amir Abdullah run that was on national television of a preseason game that made basically every single fantasy football player fall in love with him. And then he has done nothing during his NFL career. Now that's going to work in our favor at times, and it's going to be an issue at times. But I think with J.K. Dobbins, we've seen so much good of him during his college days, Hayden, that it might not be immediate. But by week 4, week 5, week 6, if he just proves to be the better player on his 8 to 10 touches per week, then I absolutely trust in Greg Roman and this Ravens team to trust him with the bulk of that backfield work.
So we've seen good of J.K. Dobbins in college. We've seen good of Mark Ingram in this existing offense. True. So we cannot – it's not surprising either Gen Z or Hayden has no respect for millennial Mark Ingram.
The one thing is J.K. Dobbins, there is enough room where he can start the year maybe as a flex play. Gus Edwards, Justice Hill combined for 13 touches a game last season. I think that J.K. Dobbins starts there and works up from there.
So we go from the Baltimore Ravens, who were 14-2 last year, to the bottom of the AFC North. That is the Cincinnati Bengals, John Daigle, who have the number 1 overall pick, had it after being 2-14 last season. Give it to us with Cincinnati, Daigle.
My question is, what should fantasy players expect from AJ Green? He previously stated he didn't want to play on the franchise tag, but when the deadline came calling, he signed it and then immediately reached out to Joe Burrow because I think he thinks he's out of options. We haven't seen him play since week 9 of the 2018 season, since he held out or was injured all of last year, or whatever you want to call it. But either way, it does seem like he has no choice but to vie for a contract either with Cincinnati or elsewhere, since it's the final years of his deal. And oddly enough, we're talking about what we should do with AJ Green, but it's Tyler Boyd who's averaged nearly 4 more fantasy points per game, and the 9 starts he's made across from Green when they've played together. So it's just a weird situation we are trying to navigate for this offense as a whole.
This is one of those teams where I think we can basically eliminate everything that they did in 2019. I still do not know who Zach Taylor is, and that's quite different than what we know of a lot of other second-year head coaches across the league. But at some point, I think that's fine. I think this whole team is kind of in a reset right now. And we've seen AJ Green, prior to his 2018 season, see 143 targets in 2017. 100 targets in 2016 in just 10 games, 132. Like, he has and potentially will again look like a top 10 wide receiver in the NFL. But Pat, that's very different in his age 32 season, possibly. Like, does he still have it? Does he still have it after all these injuries and a full season away?
Yeah, I mean, he turns 32 in 10 days and has played 9 games in 2 years. And, 3 of the past 4 years for him have been significantly disrupted by injury. He missed 6 games in 2016, all 16 games in 2017, but then missed 7 in 2018 and then all of last year. And, special talent has always been a target hog, like you said. I mean, really one of the best players in the NFL at any position when he is healthy, and AJ Green. But yeah, I mean, he's crossed the age 30 Rubicon, and everything is new. The new quarterback, the new supporting cast. I mean, playing for a coach and a play caller he didn't play for last year, at least on Sundays, and he's like the definition of a wild card, basically.
I think the Bengals are going to be near top 5 in all these volume stats. Last year, they were 7th in neutral situation offensive pace. They were 12th in neutral situation pass rate. That led to them being the 9th in total plays last year and 6th in pass attempts. If Joe Burrow can play anywhere near the levels he was playing in college as a rookie, this offense is going to be sneaky good in fantasy. I think that AJ Green and Tyler Boyd have enough room to be wide receiver 3 options. And I have Joe Burrow all the way up to my QB 12 right now, just because I think the volume is going to be there.
I was going to ask about that because you sent us this document of outliers. The rest of us, I mean, Pat has him as quarterback 22. I have him as quarterback 23. Daigle has him as quarterback 21. You are by far the highest on Joe Burrow. And I somewhat understand it because, one, we think he's uber talented. But also, we like Joe Mixon to a certain degree of him being a top 10 back that we're drafting. We like Tyler Boyd. We like AJ Green. I mean, some of us even saw John Ross have a few games last season. Is that why it adds up here to – I mean, that's a lot of trust in even Zach Taylor to have Joe Burrow as the quarterback 12, Hayden.
Yeah, this is just skill position talent. Joe Burrow's talented, and the passing volume I think is going to be there. There were 6 in pass attempts last year. If Joe Burrow can play at a league average level, and we saw Kyler Murray play at a league average level last season, I think that Joe Burrow has a good chance to meet that and quietly average 25 rushing yards per game. And that was despite the LSU wasn't having to trail that often. If they were trailing like the Bengals are, he's going to be breaking out of the pocket and scrambling. I think that he's one of the most underrated fantasy assets, period, regardless of position.
Let's just say Josh made a great point early where we have to basically throw out everything about the Bengals offense last year because they were very pass heavy in the first half of the season. Then after their bye, they basically committed the offense to Joe Mixon. And now, the whole thing has just been gutted and started over. So there's very few takeaways from the Bengals 2019 offense.
And strong chance that offensive line is, for the second year in a row, the worst in the NFL, which terrifies me investing in any of these offensive players.
Let's just call this what it is. Again, I'm making the same joke. It's Gen Z solidarity between Hayden Winks and Joe Burrow. Let's just call it what it is. Because I think Hayden's actually younger than Joe Burrow, by the way.
Joe Burrow quietly 28 years old.
You say he's Brandon Weeden. Maybe don't look it up. I think he's as old as Brandon Weeden as a rookie.
This is not true.
And the Bengals do have the 8th softest projected passing schedule this year. But my question was regarding AJ Green, because Burrow's fallout becomes much more applicable if Green, I would imagine, is on the field.
All right, moving on to the next team. That is the Cleveland Browns. This is a team who, once again, is having a new head coach in charge, now a new general manager in charge as well. But Patrick Daugherty, what is the big question, your burning question for the Cleveland Browns?
You mean can Kevin Stefanski get the most out of Baker Mayfield in play action? That is his number one order of business. That's basically what he was hired to do. I mean, fix the offense, but specifically get something going in play action. The way the NFL is trending, some of the easiest completions you're going to get, some of the biggest plays you're going to get. And, he was top 5 or 6 with the Vikings last year, almost a third of the time, 31.4%. And Kirk Cousins was a top 5 or 6 quarterback in play action. Baker Mayfield ran play action 28.7% of the time last year. That was actually 11th in the league. And amongst qualified passers on Pro Football Focus, he was dead last in play action quarterback rating at under 70. So just a horrible offensive line, which they have addressed at both right tackle and left tackle, but really just a complete lack of poise and composure in play action for Baker Mayfield last year. And, this is Kevin Stefanski's bread and butter. Can he fix this situation? Can he get these easy completions, these easy big plays for Baker Mayfield in play action? And if that doesn't happen for the Browns, if that doesn't work for the Browns again this year, it's going to be a very long year for the Browns.
This is a team last year with Kevin Stefanski, I should say the Minnesota Vikings, who, while the entire league is just trotting out multiple wide receiver sets, Stefanski easily had the lowest percentage of 11 personnel at 25% across the league. Meanwhile, he ran 2 tight end sets 34% of the time. And we don't know exactly what's up with David Njoku right now, but I think, Pat, it's always fascinating to me where we have, these cocoon coordinators, right? Guys who get passed around the league every few years to just a different team. Meanwhile, you have Stefanski coming in who says, we're going to throw off play action no matter if we have rushing success. Well, guess what? Just like last year with the Browns this year, they're going to have rushing success. But as you alluded to, all of the pressure resides on Baker Mayfield's shoulders.
The second highest rate of 12 personnel last year, though, if he does carry that over, that also entails a league high likely in 2 wide receiver sets for the Browns as opposed to 3. And with Jarvis Landry, who's proven he can play both in the slot and on the outside before Beckham joined them last year. And of course, Beckham in a year, he's not dealing with a playbook change and a sports hernia and everything else over the offseason. They are well prepared to roll out 2 wide sets to face anyone point for point.
I mean, they can basically do a shot-for-shot remake of the 2019 Vikings offense. They have the personnel. Again, too, it's not like the Vikings offensive line was great last year, but the Browns addressed that. So hopefully this offensive line is better than the Vikings offensive line was last year. But yeah, they have the personnel to do what Stefanski did with the Vikings last year. It's just, too, Stefanski, did such a good job, but I've mentioned this in other podcasts, how much of that was Kevin Stefanski and how much of that was Gary Kubiak kind of looming large behind the scenes. And Kevin Stefanski is just kind of a bigger leap of faith than people might assume based on how good of a job the Vikings offense did last year.
Yeah, drawing comparisons from the Vikings and the Browns last year, I built a deep target regression model, and Stephon Diggs was the best deep target in the league last year, and Odell Beckham was awful. It was just he is much more talented than how he performed last year. And then going into the red zone, the same exact thing. Odell, 1 of his 11 red zone targets went for a touchdown. And then Nick Chubb had 15 inside the 5 carries last year. 2 of them went for a touchdown. So they need to get better in the red zone. I think that starts with getting to the red zone more often, working off play action. Hopefully the offensive line is actually as good as what it seems to be.
And I'll quickly say that Jedrick Wills and Jack Conklin are not just minor upgrades. Those are literally line-altering upgrades at your most important spots in the trenches.
Let's close out the AFC North with the Pittsburgh Steelers. My question, what Ben Roethlisberger will the Pittsburgh Steelers get this season? It really comes down to that, right? I mean, prior to his elbow injury last year, Big Ben had back-to-back 32-plus touchdown seasons. Now he's 38 years old. But the team is set up to win now, right? Like a top defense with pass rushers and great talents in coverage. They continue to invest in pass catchers every single offseason, a good offensive line. But for some reason, they refuse and absolutely refuse. We saw Jameis Winston go for nothing, Cam Newton go for nothing to try to improve their backup quarterback spot. So if Ben comes back healthy like he was in 2018, this team is set up as easily a playoff contender.
There, but he is coming back to so in 2018, Ben Roethlisberger had one of the most prolific passing campaigns in NFL history. Had almost 5,200 yards. So it's been in very recent history that he's had a monster campaign. But that was with Antonio Brown, probably the best receiver since Jerry Rice. So a lot has changed since then. I mean, the age, as we know, you don't age kind of incrementally when you get in like your mid to late 30s as a quarterback. Like the cliff can come very suddenly. So, I mean, Ben Roethlisberger's status it's kind of like a league-altering question for 2020 because if Ben Roethlisberger is healthy, if he is Ben Roethlisberger, we're looking at a team that went 8-8, basically literally without a quarterback last year. The Steelers were set up for success everywhere else, but just did not have a quarterback. And if Big Ben is Big Ben, I mean, the AFC North is going to be an even bigger slugfest than usual. I mean, and the Steelers will be one of the top 5 or 6 teams in the NFL.
And oddly enough, despite what they saw last year, did not improve that situation whatsoever.
It makes no sense.
To run it back just in case. What's horrific and funny about this, though, is that even if Roethlisberger is healthy, an alternative question could have been, can Juju alpha his way back into wide receiver 1 territory, or was this all Antonio Brown freeing him up against lesser defenders? Because that's 2 questions that we have to answer immediately to know what to do with these players moving forward.
Yeah, it seems like the Steelers are kind of betting against Juju. They have kind of been hinting that they don't even want to resign him next year. This is a big year for Juju and his trajectory. Is he a wide receiver 2, or is he an actual alpha number 1? And it just comes down to Big Ben's health. I mean, Juju was literally unplayable last year, and I think Deontay Johnson, another person that's in the mix, they need peak Ben Roethlisberger to meet these expectations last year. And who knows, coming off a serious elbow injury, what we're going to get. If Big Ben's clicking, this could be a Super Bowl contender, really.
And I kind of think that everyone is expecting him not to come back. I mean, at least that's how he's being treated in fantasy drafts right now. Because if he does play 16 games and he does play to the degree that he did in 2018, he almost certainly is going to finish as a top 10 quarterback, and he's being drafted well behind that right now. I mean, it kind of is a what have you done for me lately fan base, fantasy player base that we are right now. But again, I mean, this team added, and we don't know what he is, but Chase Claypool in the draft. They added Eric Ebron in free agency as well. Like, no team is better at identifying pass catchers and adding them to this offense. And I mean, the success shows in their pass and coupled with this fantastic defense, but it just doesn't seem like we're all completely bought into it yet, which is fascinating to me.
I mean, I believe he was the QB 2 or 3 by average points 2 years ago. So, but yeah, it was one Antonio Brown ago. But
it's all
just a closing point. Jameis Winston is Ben Roethlisberger 2.0. Why did they not sign him for $3 million?
It's always good when a player's throwing footballs in August rather than tennis balls. So there is that. But with no preseason whatsoever, we are truly not going to know how his shoulder is feeling until week 1.
Pat, I think Ben didn't shave his beard until he could throw a football. What has to happen for you to shave your beard?
We got to beat this virus. That's
a little bit of a bigger.
Yeah, hold on to that one for a while, buddy.
Really hoping it's not 2022 for a variety of reasons, but mostly the beard.
All right, let's move on over to the AFC East. We'll kick it off with the Buffalo Bills, who at 10-6 last year continued their upward trajectory with Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane in charge.
Yeah, so I think everyone's expecting the Buffalo Bills to be a little bit better on offense this year, starting with Stephon Diggs. My biggest question is, who is going to get the Bills' red zone touches? Last year, inside the 10-yard line, Frank Gore got 18 carries, Josh Allen got 11, and Devin Singletary got 3. Obviously, Frank Gore's out. Replacing him is rookie Zach Moss, who is a much bigger back than Devin Singletary. Devin Singletary is 5'7", 203 pounds. Zach Moss, 5'9", 223 pounds. So I think the favorite here is probably Zach Moss over Devin Singletary, and that has me worried for Devin Singletary, who's being drafted as the RB24. I think that he's going to be the guy between the 20s, but what happens when you get inside the 10-yard line? And then, of course, Josh Allen's there. Josh Allen scored a touchdown on 8 of his 11 inside the 10 carries last year. That's really unsustainable. If he doesn't score that many, what does that mean for his QB7, QB8 average draft position as well? So this is a lot of these ADPs are kind of really tilting on Josh Allen really taking a step further, and I'm not sure if we're going to get that.
I kind of love, Hayden, though, that your question wasn't about Josh Allen, because it kind of seems like no matter what side you're on here, we have all realized what he is. And some people can hate that. I personally love it for the entertainment factor. And I actually think the Bills understand that too, right? They aren't expecting him to be anything that he's not. And his connection and his relationship. No, but his connection and relationship with Brian Daboll last year, I think, was fantastic in terms of a coordinator understanding a player's strengths and weaknesses. Now, that's not to say that he is the quarterback that I would pick, if you're down by 10 points in the fourth quarter and you need like perfection.
We saw what happened in that situation last year in the playoffs.
Exactly. That is not the player I would pick there. But these ancillary and tertiary pieces, adding Stephon Diggs into that this year, will make for an even more interesting dynamic and most likely result for this offense, and hopefully some more consistency.
I think the telling stat is that Singletary out-touched Frank Gore 35 of the Buffalo Bills' 43 backfield touches in his last 2 games. But even so, 3 of those 8 touches that Gore received were carries inside the 10-yard line.
And they just never seemed fully sold on Devin Singletary as an every down back. And really the touches and the snaps did not increase until Frank Gore just kind of looked out of gas. I mean, Frank Gore just looked out of gas in December. And it's almost like they didn't commit to Devin Singletary until they absolutely had to. And then, another early round investment in a back who complements him perfectly is very concerning for Devin Singletary.
So does this make Devin Singletary overvalued? Does this make Zach Moss undervalued? I mean, I'm looking on a wonderful website, rotoworld.com right now, and it has just 2 offseason blurbs on Devin Singletary. Just 2, and I know that this offseason has been weird, but
normally it'd be 19.
Right. One comes from Brandon Bean saying Devin Singletary definitely could be the workload guy, but that was before drafting Zach Moss. Then you have one from The Athletic saying that the Bills want to get Devin Singletary more involved in the passing game. That's it. That's it for a player that Hayden mentioned, I think is going as the running back 24 right now.
Yeah, he fills the category of somebody that you think is getting a lot of volume, but it's not a lot of valuable volume, not a lot of pass catching reps, not a lot of inside the 10 reps. So for me, I want to be lower than consensus on those guys. And who knows, Zach Moss could just end up being somebody that just really destroys Devin Singletary's RB2 value this year.
And that's why
I think that it's baked into his ADP, though, these questions. Like, I think that this is an appropriate ADP for him. And I think the passing game usage will increase. And even if Zach Moss has a big role, I mean, Devin Singletary is the lead back for a team that will be probably run focused again. So I think right on that RB2-3 borderline is an appropriate hedge for Devin Singletary.
Yeah, I'm indifferent on Singletary, so I'm fine with the hedge. I do believe Moss is still undervalued, though, if only because that 10.4 yards per catch on 66 receptions across 4 seasons at Utah already makes him the better receiver than Singletary out of the draft.
Moving on to the Miami Dolphins, a team that finished 5-11 last year, most likely due to great coaching, including a Week 17 win over the New England Patriots to prevent that team from getting at least some level of home field advantage. John Daigle, what's the burning question here with Dolphins?
They are returning most of their offense, but their backfield has changed entirely after Ryan Fitzpatrick led the team in rushing yards last year. Not a misspeak. So the question is, will Jordan Howard or Matt Breida lead this backfield in fantasy points? I think we can all probably agree that Jordan Howard will lead in at least touchdown carries. My issue, banking on Matt Breida, which is what I'm still doing, by the way. My fear, though, is that in week 1, it is still Patrick Laird who led the team with 174 passing routes from the backfield, who takes on the pass-catching third down role. And that strips Breida of so much value right out the gates, especially if he's not the one getting the goal line reps. So I am concerned about who to take between Howard and Breida.
I wasn't sure if the Laird hive was still active. So I'm a huge Matt Breida fan. I mean, we're all big Matt Breida fans, I feel like, on the Rotoworld staff, but Jordan Howard is the kind of person that like fantasy obsessives like underestimate like every year. I don't necessarily mean Jordan Howard in particular, but we always underestimate 2-down grinders and like how much coaching staffs love them. And yeah, I mean, Jordan Howard is probably going to begin, not probably, almost certainly will begin the year with the touch lead. And Matt Breida is a more explosive player. He's a more versatile, much more versatile player. I think he will take over the backfield at some point, but it could just take a frustratingly long time and make a lot of summer Matt Breida shares feel like a mistake.
I'm interested to know the percentage of the NFL audience that knows that Chan Gailey is the offensive coordinator of the Miami Dolphins. Because, I mean, this is a now 68-year-old offensive coordinator who has been out of the league since 2016, yet for a very long time, he was well ahead of the NFL curve of understanding passing volume, understanding 3 and 4 wide receiver sets. So where is the 68-year-old going to push the boundaries even more in 2020, Hayden Winks? Because again, despite his age, he has been very modern in his approach.
Yeah, I think Devontae Parker is basically the only guy that I want to be targeting this offense. Drafting a committee backfield behind one of the worst offensive lines in the league, a team that's going to be trailing a ton this year. I just want to avoid the situation. This Matt Breida and Jordan Howard kind of fit into this running back mold where I would rather be taking high upside RB insurance types, Latavius Murray's, Chase Edmonds, those types over these guys, just because if everything goes right, let's say Matt Breida takes over and he's got like a 3-down role, he's maybe a low-end RB2, and I would rather just have a guy that could be a top 10 option at very similar ADPs.
I don't think it's a stretch to draft both either in best ball leagues or in season long if you'd like. I think you can get away with having exposure to both.
I was going to close this conversation out by saying the same thing, Daigle, where like let's say you start your draft with a running back, then you get Travis Kelce, then like Patrick Mahomes and, 3 wide receivers in a row, and you're just struggling at the running back position. It's not the worst scenario in the world to completely own a backfield. That is the cheapest one to do in the entire league right now is Jordan Howard. And there's probably a good reason. I mean, you have 5 questionable blockers in front of them, and maybe Ryan Fitzpatrick starting a number of games once again this year on a team that, was better coached than it should have been last year. But again, just getting the volume aspect in a best ball format where you don't have to choose and designate which one you want each and every week. Again, I think there are worse options you can potentially have.
Not many, but there probably are some.
Okay, let's move on to the New England Patriots. Quiet off season up in New England. Not many. I'm just kidding. I mean, what a wild few months with the Patriots, including Bill Belichick, including Cam Newton. Pat, I turn it over to you.
I mean, there's no need to get precious with this one. It is which version of Cam Newton will we get in 2020? The Cam Newton who in the first half of 2018 was kind of quietly playing some of the best football of his career, kind of taking the easy throws for the first time, having a connection with a running back for the first time, was completing almost 70% of his passes. And then the second half of the season, we're going to get the version of Cam Newton whose shoulder began to hurt, and downfield looked like he had no idea where the ball was going. Like he was basically just heaving the ball. And, that kind of carried over to the beginning of last year, even before the foot injury. So which are we going to get Cam that was more efficient, that can fit in perfectly with the way this Patriots offense is designed, because it's designed to be a running offense right now. So we can still have dual threat Cam. Then we still have some great short area targets and James White and Mohamed Sanu and Julian Edelman. And if Cam Newton can resemble like the first 8 games of 2018, I mean, he's almost a perfect fit for this offense. An offense that wants to run the ball but have efficient passing targets. And if we get that version of Cam, I mean, we're getting like a full-on Cam renaissance, and we're going to have a top 12, top 8 or 10 probably fantasy quarterback. But if we get the Cam who still, doesn't have any faith in his deep ball and is tentative and letting that tentativeness like spill over into the rest of his game, we might have a player who just kind of looks depressingly over the hill for someone who is such a legendary athlete.
And in that stretch in 2018, it was everything we want from our fantasy quarterbacks with number one ceiling, 9.1 carries per game, the third most fantasy points per game behind just Patrick Mahomes and Matt Ryan in that stretch before his shoulder did get injured. He's already traveled to New England for his physical, and that was a few weeks back. And we haven't heard anything since, so I'm assuming it's positive. He's already been working out with Mo Sanu and N'Keal Harry in the area. So all signs point to, as you said, the Cam renaissance. So I can't help but be extremely excited about him as a player who's currently being drafted as the QB 15 overall in high stakes leagues. That's safe enough to essentially grab yourself a QB 1, not being drafted worth his value at all.
We talked a lot about the 12-4 Patriots on the show last year. Tom play. I got like how he been spot last year. I think he's better than a lot of the Broncos does because he was, fantastic at realizing who the open receiver is going to be and designating who to throw the football to based on coverage. Well, guess what? Cam Newton is a highly intelligent quarterback, and you put him possibly behind the best offensive line he's had in a number of years. Sure, I'll give it to you. He's not going to be quite the playmaker with his legs, and hopefully that shoulder holds up. But if you actually give him the pass catching options and running back options that he has on this team, I think it would be stunning to me if this team finishes in the back half of offensive play during the 2020 season. But based on where so many of these players are going, that's almost expected right now.
Yeah, I would have to look at this, but the Patriots might have the lowest, their top ranked fantasy player might be the lowest out of any of the 32 teams in the league. I think it might be Julian Edelman as like the wide receiver 34 right now. Keep in mind, Edelman was the wide receiver 11 on a per game basis last year. The Patriots invest the most money on the interior offensive line this year. They have a lot of offensive line continuity, and keep in mind, they were first in offensive pace and neutral script situations last year. So I think all of these guys are being relatively priced at their floors. And if Cam Newton plays like he has in the past, I mean, Mohamed Sanu could be maybe a flex option, maybe N'Keal Harry. You have both of the running backs, obviously
James
Cam
White.
Newton, and then Julian Edelman being, really priced at near their floors.
Give them to me. Give them to me.
I wrote this in the Patriots preview as our team previews continue running on the site. And I really think you have to leave your draft with either Mo Sanu or N'Keal Harry every single time you run a best ball league, because one of them seems like the sneaky option to surpass Julian Edelman in age 34 as they run a personnel set we haven't seen in such a long time, likely with Dalton Keene and Devin Asiasi.
I don't know if we'll pass Julian Edelman, by the way, but Mo Sanu literally living with the coach. That's amazing. And they gave up a second-round pick for him. It was disappointing. He was playing hurt the entire second half of the season, so we didn't get real Patriots Mo Sanu last year. And it comes down to me with Cam Newton. Are we drafting Cam Newton or are we drafting Daniel Jones?
We got the one game of Mo Sanu where he played every single snap, and in that game he played a career low slot rate because they basically changed his role moving into the outside. So that could be a sudden late career breakout because he's not forced to play the position he was dwindling in.
I'm taking notes to be a better host and not let us get to a point where we talk about Mohamed Sanu for a minute next.
Sorry.
All right, let's close the AFC East with the New York Jets. Simple question here. Can the Jets develop and improve talent? I mean, the answer so far with Adam Gase and this coach.
This will be a quick one.
has been no. Like, who performed well last season? It certainly was not Le'Veon Bell. It was not CJ Mosley. It was not top 5 pick Quinnen Williams. I know Jets fans will say that Sam Darnold's week, 11 through 17 were solid. Okay, if you just want solid quarterback play for Sam Darnold's entire career, then he's not going to live up to expectations. The time is now for the New York Jets to step up in this division, because this division has never been more wide open since the Belichick and Brady relationship started. But truly, can anyone feel confident as a casual observer of NFL, as a close observer of fans of the New York Jets? Can anyone have confidence and say that Adam Gase and his coaching staff are the right people to do it? And the answer is no.
No, and just they have Sam Darnold on the Sam Bradford diet. It's just extremely unfortunate because you poor early career coaching turnover, poor coaching, horrible line play, not nearly enough weapons. They finally kind of addressed the offensive line this offseason. Not kind of. They addressed the offensive line this offseason. It's still an extremely questionable supporting cast. And they've just done everything they can to basically wreck Sam Darnold's confidence. And we've seen this a lot with talented quarterbacks earlier in their career. If they go through 3 or 4 years of chaos, sometimes it's just not something they can come back from. And I am very worried because he's an extremely talented, still extremely young player, but they are setting Sam Darnold up to fail.
And there will be volume for this offense as a whole. You don't basically trade for the Colts secondary from last year and adding Quincy Wilson and Pierre Desir, and then suddenly not have to throw the ball every single down because you're behind in every single game. There will be loads of plays, but yes, there are 3 options, I guess it is. It is Jamison Crowder to lead the team in targets, Le'Veon Bell to hopefully buoy those 300-plus touches again, unless Frank Gore does steal that many and score more than just 3 rushing touchdowns. And then Chris Herndon, who I still believe is a tight end 1 waiting to happen this year.
My issue here is, yes, the division's kind of wide open just from like a team perspective, but for the passing catchers for the Jets specifically, look at the cornerbacks in the division. The secondaries in the AFC East is just really nasty. And if the Jets are down 14-24, and all of a sudden Sam Darnold's got to be tossing to Stephon Gilmore and Brian Jones or Tre'Davious White, the list goes on and on, I would be worried. I think Jamison Crowder is probably going to do pretty well in the slot as a PPR, like wide receiver 3 flex play. But man, it's not looking good for the Jets once again, even though they made small improvements on the offensive line.
Okay, we've been really negative with the Jets, and that's easy to do. So I'll end this one with some positivity and a little bit of a spin here. I think there is an avenue for the Jets to do what the Bills did last year. I mean, the Bills went from 6-10 to 10-6. The Jets finished last season 7-9. Can't they at least go 9-7? And we talked about improving the offensive line. That's exactly what the Bills did. I would say the big drawback and the big difference is just how much respect and talent Sean McDermott has as a coordinator, and was able to coach that group and turn it into a fantastic group. I'm not sure the Jets are necessarily able to do that. But again, just based on the Patriots possibly not being the Patriots that we know, I think the opportunity is there more so than it ever has been before.
I mean, even if Jarrett Stidham is the Patriots quarterback, I would rather bet on the Patriots than the Jets. So,
so much for that positivity.
Yep.
Not to bring it down again, but the Jets also have the 3rd toughest schedule based on Vegas's season win totals.
All right, actual positive note. Jamison Crowder's a buy at average draft position.
Jamison Crowder's never fooled anyone before in fantasy. So, sorry, Hayden.
Okay, let's move on to the AFC South. The AFC South that was won last year by these Houston Texans, finishing at 10-6. But Hayden, it's never quiet in Houston with Bill O'Brien in charge.
Yeah, my burning question is, will Bill O'Brien trade Deshaun Watson for a 6th round pick? No, actually it is, who will be the Texans' leading receiver? My bet is Will Fuller. I think we've been talking about continuity a lot this year. And of course, Will Fuller and Deshaun Watson have this chemistry that's you can't really explain, and is just going downfield. Will Fuller's 16-game pace with Deshaun Watson over the last 2 seasons. 68 catches for over 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns. Keep in mind, that's with DeAndre Hopkins averaging about 10 targets per game. If Will Fuller sees a couple extra looks this year, we can be looking at a massive ceiling. He's being priced down all the way at the wide receiver 33. I want him for sure inside my top 30 because there's a top 20, top 15 upside. And then keep in mind, Brandon Cooks has 5 documented concussions. We don't know what we're getting from Kenny Stills. Randall Cobb had a good season last year, but I think by far the most upside here is with Will Fuller.
I'm just still asking who Tim Kelly is. Like, I even did the Texans write-up. But with that said, to me, it's very notable with how much Bill O'Brien believes in his own ability in so many other parts of the organization that he was able to look at himself and say, hey, this offense is going to be better without me, you know? And Tim Kelly, hopefully, and going back to your Will Fuller point here, Hayden, it seems like his goal is to give as many downfield options as possible with Will Fuller and Brandon Cooks and even Kenny Stills. Then have Randall Cobb now in the fold who had the same average depth of target as DeAndre Hopkins did last year, and then hopefully improve that running game both from an offensive line standpoint and with David Johnson maybe being better than what Carlos Hyde did last year. And so from that big picture standpoint, I understand what the goal of this offense is with Tim Kelly.
I'm all in on Will Fuller as a wide receiver 2. I'm not concerned with injury because even if he gets injured, fine, whatever, he can literally win your week at his respective position where he's being drafted. However, we do need to be concerned with perhaps the risk of ruin in Deshaun Watson. It's the first time in his career he's playing without DeAndre Hopkins, and he's averaged the most yards per target, adjusted completion rate, and touchdown rate to Hopkins among all of his wideouts the last 2 years. So there's an unknown baked in that no one seems to be talking about, and that is this offense just being bad altogether.
They are set up to come at teams in many different. I mean, and they could run the Arizona Cardinals offense really if they wanted to, with Will Fuller and Brandon Cooks on the outside, Randall Cobb, maybe even Kiki Cutie on the inside, and then Kenny Stills who could do both. So they have, they have somehow, despite trading DeAndre Hopkins, they have an interesting receiver core, and those are two of the best pass catching backs in the NFL. So Deshaun Watson should have he's not going to lack for like quality places to funnel the ball. It's just so much change after such a bizarre offseason. The Giants, I mean, at the very least, they could come out like really stilted and kind of a false start on the season in the first 4 to 5 games as they try to figure this out, because no offseason reps and no preseason to implement this much change is going to be very difficult.
I think the one saving grace with Deshaun Watson in fantasy is his splits when the Texans are trailing. Deshaun Watson scrambles a heck of a lot more. I think we can see 500-plus rushing yards from him this season, and we can take away some of his efficiency, but I think we're going to have more volume all around.
This team had a negative point differential last year. I mean, they won the division, they won 10 games and scored 7 fewer points than their opponent throughout the entire regular season last year. Just to put a capper on the Will Fuller conversation, he is the type that so many people in your league are going to find negatives for, and namely that he's injured, because that is so easy to do. I implore everyone out there to look at it from the opposite perspective, because in that range, it is not a fantasy season destroyer if he does not hit, if he does get injured once again. But if he does, and if he continues that 16-game path and expectation that he set out when playing with Deshaun Watson and when healthy, then you potentially have a top 12 wide receiver on his hands. So look at the positives here, Will Fuller, instead of the multitude of negatives that are possible. All right, let's move on. Let's move on to the Indianapolis Colts, John Daigle. The Indianapolis Colts, who finished 7-9 last year, but have a new quarterback in Phillip Rivers.
What version of T.Y. Hilton will we see? Because even if it's the same version of Phillip Rivers that we saw last year, the fact is, with only Paris Campbell, Pascal, thank you. And Michael Pittman. Yes, the fact is the team needs Hilton healthy. Last year, he was injured for a better part of the season, but we forget he actually opened the year through Indianapolis' first 3 games with 20 catches, 195 yards, and 4 touchdowns on a 27% target share at full health. Now he's 31 in November. He's on the final year of his contract, and he legitimately has something to prove. And OC Nick Sirianni recently came out and said Hilton is still who this pass offense runs through. So what do you think we see from him this year?
Yeah, and plus he's the kind of receiver, I mean, unless Phillip Rivers' arm is just completely shot, which it might be. It appeared to be last year. I mean, this is the kind of receiver Phillip Rivers has had a lot of success with in his career, someone who can do damage down the field. And we know T.Y. Hilton is much more than that, but that is the most compelling, most dangerous part of his game. So this could be a great skills match between T.Y. Hilton and Phillip Rivers. But yeah, it all depends on Phil's arm, which was looking quite dead, especially in the second half of 2019.
Go ahead, Josh.
Should this team be getting the type of buzz that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are getting? I mean, I don't know if this team is getting enough love this offseason, because you look at like every single layer of the roster, right? The offensive line, most likely a top 5 unit in the NFL. Defensively, they just traded for a defensive maker and a difference maker in DeForest Buckner. I mean, you have Bobby Okereke and Darius Leonard at that linebacker group, a number of other names that I haven't mentioned, along with a offensive skill position players that Daigle did. It just comes down to Phillip Rivers, right, Hayden? Like, does he know where the football is going when he releases it? Because for his entire career, he has been one of the best anticipation throwers in the league, but has that completely fallen off a cliff, which it's entirely possible that it has, because we know Phillip Rivers has played for a very long time behind a very bad offensive line and played injured numerous occasions. And I just hope we get good Phillip Rivers, because if we do, the Colts might be one of the more exciting teams in the NFL.
The other note is the Colts have the easiest schedule in the NFL according to opponent win totals. I think this is probably Phillip Rivers' best offensive line he's ever played behind. And then if you just look at back to T.Y. Hilton, look at Jacoby Brissett's splits on where he's throwing the ball to versus Phillip Rivers. A lot of Jacoby Brissett's game last year was underneath. Phillip Rivers, as we've seen for a lot of years, is willing to throw it downfield. I think that's where you're going to see T.Y. Hilton return to the low-end wide receiver 2 range. And he's kind of been forgotten about talent. I mean, he's not that old. Of course, you have some injury concerns, but like we've mentioned before, the upside probably outweighs the risk you're taking. And especially he's like a mid-range wide receiver 3 in a lot of fantasy drafts right now.
And Paris Campbell is completely forgotten about. Like Paris Campbell is barely being drafted in fantasy leagues, and maybe rightfully so, right? But he's also a player who, with the ball in his hands, there's a chance he's one of the best in the league after the catch. And so adding those 2 outside players in T.Y. Hilton and Michael Pittman, maybe even a Zach Pascal, could really open things up for Paris Campbell as we move forward. But we won't know because of no preseason games.
But for me, even if Rivers is the same as last year, it still comes down to Hilton. This team ran the ball at the 3rd highest rate in neutral game script. It's what they want to do. They created a hat that said as much. So they can still bulldoze their way to the playoffs, but they need explosion. And I don't think you can depend on Michael Pittman in his rookie year to deliver that. You have to have someone with proven rapport like T.Y. Hilton.
I will say it's what they wanted to do with Jacoby Brissett. They ran a much faster paced offense with Andrew Luck, and then really slowed it down at times last year with Jacoby Brissett. And Phillip Rivers actually had the best years of his career under Frank Reich in San Diego. And they kind of alternated in pace, but the final year they ran a pretty fast paced offense in 2015. So yeah, it just a very, very intriguing offense.
The Jacksonville Jaguars finished last season at 6-10, but Patrick Daugherty this year, they enter with the lowest projected win total of any team of the 2020 season.
Yeah, that's because they appear to be a franchise that's not trying, and that they retained Doug Marrone, retained Dave Caldwell as GM, who has won more than 6 games, I believe, once in 7 years as his general manager. And then they retained Gardner Minshew. And to me, the question for the Jags is Gardner Minshew more than a meme? Like Minshew was he's like a social media phenomenon last year, but went through very prolonged cold stretches as Jaguars quarterback, and not the world's most imposing physical specimen as a passer. But as I did study Gardner Minshew more this offseason, I feel like maybe I was not giving him enough credit for just how impressive his rookie season really was. As a 6th round rookie thrown into the fire in week 1, in the middle of the game. He honestly had one of the better rookie seasons of the 21st century for a quarterback. His 21 touchdowns were tied for 8th. His 91.2 quarterback rating was tied for 8th amongst 54 rookies to make at least 8 starts since 2000. He threw the 4th fewest interceptions with only 6. And, and he showed some athletic upside. He had 344 yards rushing, which was 5th most amongst quarterbacks last year and 11th most amongst rookie quarterbacks since 2000. And, so he's maybe was a more accomplished quarterback last year than I was giving him credit for. And, to get into non-analytics football, he has 2 things that you can't teach, where he clearly has poise and he clearly has moxie. And after just studying up on it a little more, maybe I won't be so harsh on the Jags for maybe just seeing what Gardner Minshew could do in a year where they're not going to go anywhere anyway. So yeah, if Gardner Minshew is more than a meme this year and ready to actually be a multi-year starter for an NFL football team.
It seems like so many teams around the league, though, Pat, are super confident or comfortable in their quarterback situations. Meanwhile, the Jaguars are basically okay, the best we can do to improve this year is just give another year and a weird offseason to Gardner Minshew, because it's not like these numbers were great last year. They were almost bottom in the league in red zone trips that ended with a touchdown. They were 20th in total yards. Their pace and neutral game scripts was 30th in the NFL. Their percent of passes 15 plus air yards was 27th in the league last year. Like, it just seems like, I don't want to say it's a lost season, even though it probably is for the Jaguars, but we just see so many of these other teams try to put their franchise or their offense in a better position to succeed. And it just feels like the Jaguars have even more questions with this Leonard Fournette just drama dangling over them as they enter 2020.
It's a tank by another name, because they're either tanking or Gardner Minshew proves everyone wrong again and is better than expected, and they happen to find a quarterback. So it's kind of like a no downside tank. They're either going to tank through the season, reposition themselves for 2021, or they're going to find that they accidentally lucked into a quarterback in the 6th round.
And his outlandish personality and swagger is one that it should reek of a Tony Romo gunslinger game, but oddly enough, he just doesn't throw downfield whatsoever. He prefers to roll out and then check down. His 10% deep ball rate on 20+ yard pass attempts was 26th among starters last year. I think it's good if he's going to play that way, that we are now likely replacing Leonard Fournette's dump offs underneath to a arguably more explosive player like Chris Thompson, reuniting with Jay Gruden, arguably a more explosive player like Laviska Shenault this year. And Minshew also showed that he can carry DJ Chark into a wide receiver 1 season. So I think there are reasons to be excited about this offense. But yes, this will truly be Minshew's last chance to be a starter in Jacksonville, because if it goes awry, they just limp into Justin Fields or Trevor Lawrence.
Yep. You mentioned all the negative things I was focusing on with Minshew, kind of like all offseason, and I just feel like it's easy to take for granted that, again, he's not blowing anyone away, but it was truly one of the better rookie quarterback seasons of the entire century.
I agree.
And he definitely deserves a little credit, which I had not been giving him until I was forced to write about him in the Jaguars fantasy preview for Rotoworld.com.
Yeah. Again, there were weeks where he was the best rookie quarterback in the NFL last season. All right, let's close out the AFC South with the Tennessee Titans. Simple question again. Will the same script work, right? The Titans scored 16.3 points per game, 28th in the league in the 6 games where Marcus Mariota started last season. And the 10 under Ryan Tannehill, they scored 30.4 points per game, which ranked 3rd in the league. And that's the reason why they brought the band back together. It's take 2. Ryan Tannehill's back in a long-term deal. Derrick Henry's back on a long-term deal. The lone significant change is losing Jack Conklin at right tackle. I think the people will have this idea that they ran to win last year, when in reality, it really was Hayden, Ryan Tannehill throwing to create positive game script, and then Derrick Henry just punishing defenses when they're in that positive game script. But that just doesn't seem like the formula or the script that is sustainable year over year over year in the type of league this has become in the last decade.
Yeah, with the Titans last year, the big thing that I've got some concerns with is not Ryan Tannehill being a decent starter. I really do think he is a decent starter. I think the offensive line remains one of the better units in the league. Derrick Henry, obviously one of the best rushing talents. It's just the rate stats. Last year, they scored a touchdown on 76% of their red zone trips. That is unheard of good, and by far the most in the league. Ryan Tannehill, career high, 7.7% touchdown rate. And then shifting over to A.J. Brown, who I absolutely love, but he led the league in yards after the catch over expected and touchdowns over expected, through the roof. All of these rate stats are going to come down a little bit. I think that they can be an interesting offense. I still think they'll be an average or to slightly above average offense, but we have to just be a little bit careful where some of these guys are being drafted.
They play the lowest margin for error style offense in the NFL. When you establish the run and they do pop a shot, play action, passing, there's just no margin for error. And as you said, they worked it to almost shocking perfection last year. That 76% red zone touchdown stat, is legitimately shocking. But as we know, it's the kind of thing that does not repeat easily. And this is the kind of offense too, that if they're not playing, they were playing with the lead most of the time in the second half of the season last year. If they're not playing with the lead, it's the kind of thing that can go haywire very quickly. We have large sample sizes too of Ryan Tannehill playing in non-perfect situations, playing from behind, and is not a good quarterback. So yeah, it's an interesting double down. Let's put it that way.
He did show enough juice, though, with those 4 carries per game and his 13 starts to close the year, that he deserves to be lobbied as a high-end quarterback too, because those legs could help him surpass the statues like your Baker Mayfield, Jared Goff, Tom Brady, on and on, if they are due for more competitive game scripts this year.
Yeah, look, I've been a card-carrying member of Ryan Tannehill fan club since the 2012 NFL draft. I love seeing him. So it's been a long time, Pat, let me tell you. Lots of up and downs in this career. But, I mean, it's been fun to see him succeed. But, Hayden, you mentioned it. Pat, you mentioned it. There's obvious areas of regression. 30th in offensive plays last year. They were bottom 2 in pass attempts last year, yet second in passing EPA. It's also a team that like basically gave away Jarrell Casey, which is like some weird storyline that we've barely discussed as a team leader and someone who was an anchor of that defense for so many years. I don't know. I mean, it's not like this team won a lot of games last year, right? They were 9-7 in the regular season and really had that spark because that's what happened in the playoffs. I think that they can at least hit 9-7 again this year, and maybe that's enough to win the AFC South. But again, I think there are obvious areas where it's absolutely fair to question. So.
Yeah, they had a 69% win percentage, really nice with Tannehill last season. And then keep in mind, this division's not that great. The Texans defense isn't very good. Of course, the Jaguars, we just mentioned, was one of the worst teams. And then I think the Colts have like an average defense. So I think that there's a chance that Ryan Tannehill pays off his like low-end QB2 price tag, and Derrick Henry's another first-round pick the following season.
Let's close it out with the AFC West. First, we will go over to the Denver Broncos, who have added in the last 2 years so many pass catchers to go along with a breakout 2019 of Cortland Sutton. Hayden Winks, this is yours.
Is Drew Lock good? So last year in 5 games, he averaged 204 passing yards, 1.4 touchdowns, and 0.7 interceptions. That is pretty average numbers. And that was against the Chargers, the Texans, the Chiefs, the Lions, and the Raiders. Not necessarily the greatest defenses either. And all of these, I mean, there's a lot of options in fantasy. Cortland Sutton's the 20th drafted receiver. Jerry Jeudy's the wide receiver 43. Noah Fant's the tight end 15. Melvin Gordon is a top 20 running back. And then Philip Lindsay's also a top 40 running back. So a lot is hinging on Drew Lock actually being an NFL starting caliber talent, and we literally have no idea. He went in the second round for a reason. He was inconsistent at Missouri. I think he was inconsistent in his starts. I think we can be excited that he's a decent deep passer, but is he good enough from 0 yards to 20 yards where he can have a consistent Broncos offense? And then the other question is, what kind of offense are we getting? Pat Shurmur was a kind of an aggressive play caller with the Giants last year, and the Broncos were way, way, way low in a lot of these aggressiveness metrics that we can look at.
We're hoping that their actions speak louder than like their 2019 statistics, because obviously they're set up to be extremely aggressive with the Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler and even Albert O additions. I mean, again, the whole draft was focused on finding playmakers and specifically players who can make plays down the field. And yeah, I'm beating a dead horse, but like, it is shocking to me that the Broncos actually understood who Drew Lock was and then tried to build their offense around his strengths, which, like you said, is down the field. And I mean, you're not going to survive as a down the field quarterback if you're as inconsistent in the short to intermediate areas as Drew Lock was in college. But they're at least setting him up for success, which is just such a bizarrely rare concept in the NFL, especially from this team. I would not have expected it with the Stone Age offense they wanted to run last year, and just like the way that John Elway had approached building offense since losing Peyton Manning. So just a huge breath of fresh air the way they approach this offseason. But yeah, Drew Lock is a very volatile, could go either way talent at quarterback.
We saw Joe Flacco and something called Brandon Allen play quarterback for the Broncos last year. And yet those two players, although we want nothing to do with them, performed better than Drew Lock in his last 5 starts. PFF charts catchable targets, and Cortland Sutton's target rate was 13% more catchable from Flacco rather than Drew Lock. Fant suffered the same fate and had a 9% target share from Lock 2.8 targets per game, fewer than 3, as opposed to getting 6 from Brandon Allen. This offense altogether is something I don't want a part of, despite having super specimen athletes like Sutton and Fant, not to mention KJ Hamler and Jerry Jeudy, because I don't think Locke can support them.
Pat, as the biggest Drew Lock fan outside of Denver, probably right
John
now.
Elway's office.
Yeah, what is the confidence level in Drew Lock's sophomore year in your seat right now?
I mean, it's probably 49%. I think he's like a true 50-50, but if I had to get, I would still bet on Drew Lock just failing as an NFL prospect just because he was so baffling he was so good at the parts of quarterback that should be hard, making big plays down the field, and then just bafflingly inconsistent at the parts that are supposed to be easy, taking checkdowns, making 7 to 8 yard completions over the middle of the field. And he was just so inconsistent at that. So, but to me, he does have a special skill. I mean, he has a special not every quarterback has a special trait, and he really is a special player as a deep passer. So it's something to build around there. But yeah, I just don't know if we're going to end up getting the consistency that you need at what should be the gimme parts of quarterbacking from Drew Lock.
Let's move on to the Super Bowl champions, Kansas City Chiefs, who finished 12-4 in the regular season last year, even despite a few absences of Patrick Mahomes because he dislocated his kneecap during the regular season last year and still went on to be just an absolute star for the rest of the season. John Daigle, what's your one burning question ahead of 2020?
Mahomes is Mahomes. The good news is we don't have any questions because it doesn't matter. He's Patrick Mahomes. What everyone wants to know is, will Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Damian Williams split touches among this backfield? Reed's week 1 starter during his tenure with the Chiefs has recorded at least 16.4 touches per game in 6 of 7 seasons he's coached the Chiefs. Reed's starting runner has averaged at least 16.7 fantasy points in 5 of the past 7 seasons he's coached the Chiefs. He obviously wants to have one back, but wasn't allowed to do so with Damian Williams starting 11 games, underperforming, and then as he's done the past 2 years, exploding in the playoffs only. I do believe that Clyde Edwards-Helaire will lead this team in touches, but I also think Williams will do just enough, if only for his pass blocking skills over Edwards-Helaire, that he offers value currently as a mid-6th round pick.
I just feel like we're wasting so much time with Damian Williams right now. You know, like he's one of these players who, and I wasn't on it prior to last season because I just wanted as much exposure to this Kansas City Chiefs offense as possible. But, and I've said this before, and maybe this is just hyperbole, but I feel like Clyde Edwards-Helaire is like the closest thing to Christian McCaffrey entering the NFL in quite some time because he is already so proficient in the passing game. I mean, set a 10-season high among SEC backs with catches last season. This is a team who is a player who was handpicked by Andy Reid, compared him to Brian Westbrook, was the name that Patrick Mahomes brought up the morning of the first round, who Brett Veach obviously signed off on. And it's not like we're drafting him in the top 10 of running backs right now. I think he's even a value where he's going despite the questionable offseason and workload, because no matter what, unless we are just so off and the team is so off, and I don't trust the Chiefs to do this in their evaluation, that he's going to emerge as the best back in the best offense in the NFL.
He's Christian McCaffrey minus 4 inches. And, the Chiefs didn't draft Clyde Edwards-Helaire to be James White. We know that. You don't use a first-round pick on a running back that you don't plan on eventually being an every-down running back. We know he's a special pass-catching talent, but I mean, Andy Reid has preferred to have like a true lead back throughout his career, but I mean, this is just literally last year he won a Super Bowl with a committee that was basically never settled the entire year. And so I just don't think he's going to feel the need to force the issue with this 5'7" rookie who didn't have an offseason and make him the guy from week 1 forward, because they just don't need to.
But you know who's going to force it for him is Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And at least, I mean, that's easy for me to say for me right now, because you know who didn't force it last year? Darrell Williams didn't force him to have a single back. LaShawn McCoy didn't force him to have a single back. Damian Williams didn't. Now they have a legitimate first-round talent in the backfield, right? And so to me, it changes this formula completely.
He's a real question mark to me as an early down runner in the NFL, just at that size. I mean, you just by definition are, and I just think, I don't think you can really overestimate the impact the completely lost offseason is going to have on a lot of these rookies. I mean, they're just so far behind. I mean, not a single live rep. I mean, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, by September, it'll have been 8 months since he's had a live rep of football. And when you're going from that to trying to be the starting running back for the Super Bowl champions, like, that's quite an ask. And the Chiefs just do not have to force the issue.
I mean, I will also say that it helps that he basically played an NFL offense last year because his offensive coordinator is now.
We know that there's no such thing as basically an NFL offense in college football. There's just not.
I mean, the coordinator is the offensive coordinator for the Panthers now. So.
With zero NFL play calling experience. So, I mean, it's just like, it's not comparable. I mean, there's good things to go on. We got a good feeling about it, but we truly do not know.
The difference is in redraft leagues, Clyde Edwards-Helaire's floor makes him flex worthy, whereas his ceiling is joining this podcast as a top 5 overall pick next year. Damian Williams' floor is Darrell Williams, and that's what concerns me. Having said that, my stance is still, I think you can get by with him as your RB2 in the mid rounds as everyone's scared off of him.
Hayden, any closing thoughts?
I have Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Damian Williams both above consensus. I just want pieces of this offense, but let's make this very clear. Damian Williams is an average at best running back talent, and he might even be a below average talent. And a lot of the metrics I was looking at, adjusted yards per carry, broken tackles, all these things below average. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, if he's just even good, I think that he's going to take over this offense early. I have him as my RB10, RB11, and I mean the ceiling's just ungodly.
The Raiders moved from Oakland to Las Vegas this offseason. I would even say that they played above expectation last year because of the offensive line, because of Josh Jacobs during his rookie year. Pat, what are you going to say about them here in 2020?
Yeah, I mean, this feels like kind of a lame question, but I mean, will Josh Jacobs be more involved as a pass catcher? Because to me, he's a top 5 or 6 talent as like an early down runner. Like, has just an elite fantasy ceiling if he could just get a little more run as a pass catcher. And he was 47th in running back targets last year, only had 27. I mean, to really kind of take the next step as like a fantasy asset, as like a clear every week RB1 in every format, not just standard, he needs to get in the 40 to 50 target range. And that's just going to be hard to do with Jalen Richard still in the picture, Henry Ruggs, who need touches manufactured now in the picture, and then weird slash hybrid Lynn Bowden, who's going to need touches manufactured and is a special talent in his own right, maybe. And I want Josh Jacobs is so talented as a runner. I mean, what he did last year with essentially a busted shoulder as an NFL rookie, I mean, so impressive, such a good runner. But yet to really take the next step in fantasy, he needs more target. I think he can handle it. I mean, to me, it's in his pedigree that he can handle 40 to 50, even 60 passing game targets. But I just don't know if he's going to get there. But that's what I'm looking for. If the Raiders, if he gets that kind of target share as a receiver, I mean, he's going to be someone drafted on the RB1-2 borderline who's like a steal as a top 5 or 6 running back.
Hayden, is there any evidence that Josh Jacobs should not get more targets? Like every single time he got them at Alabama, he produced. It seemed like every single time he got little short passes last year, he was able to create yards in his own. Is it just a case of where either all of us on the outside are overhyping him or correct, and his own team can't evaluate this because they just want to use multiple backs in that scenario?
Yeah, I think there's room for growth as a pass catcher, like everyone is agreeing with. The issue is it's not setting up very, very strongly for fantasy this year. The Raiders have the 4th hardest schedule in the NFL right now. And last year, Josh Jacobs, when the team was leading, took 35% of the offensive touches. When they were trailing, that dropped down to 22%. That is not good. And then, of course, like you said, add Henry Ruggs, the rest of them. I think that this is going to be more of an offense where you kind of want to be taking a Henry Ruggs late, maybe a Hunter Renfrow if you're into that type of thing, and not Josh Jacobs in the 2nd round. Not
only did they re-sign Richard and sign Devontae Booker, a league average 3rd down back, they were remember, on LaShawn McCoy and Frank Gore. They contacted both. They have made it very clear, despite what I think he can do, that they do not want Josh Jacobs on passing downs and would rather reserve him to grind out early downs.
And I believe Lynn Bowden is wearing number 33, which just puts him in that running back number field instead of that wide receiver number field. Just low-key question that I quickly want to suggest. Could Henry Ruggs lead all rookies in targets this season? Abso-damn-lutely. And that would just be dynamite with his yards after catch capabilities and would make him a tremendous value in that wide receiver grouping and where we're taking him right now.
I got to, and is the real question with the Raiders, I realize I should have asked, is Lynn Bowden the best quarterback on the Raiders?
Good question.
Okay.
Good question.
Or if
For those
Marcus,
of you who aren't familiar, Lynn Bowden was a strange quarterback running back hybrid for the University of Kentucky last season.
All right, let's close this out with the Los Angeles Chargers. Speaking of quarterbacks, does Tyrod Taylor put a ceiling on this offense? And if so, one, does Anthony Lynn recognize that? And how long does it take for Justin Herbert to capture the job away from Tyrod Taylor? You know, the team is set to win right now. Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Hunter Henry, Austin Eckler, that's way more than good enough to win. They signed 31-year-old Brian Bulaga to play right tackle. And the defense with Joey Bosa, Melvin Ingram, Derwin James, Chris Harris, Casey Hayward, I mean, it's great, but defenses' windows are small. They're projected at just 7.5 wins right now. So is Anthony Lynn going to be able to evaluate his personal relationship, which seems like it's very personal, with Tyrod Taylor and say, for the betterment of our team, are we better off with this rookie who knows how that preseason is going to go or offseason is going to go? And can he elevate us to where we need to go? Or is this team, again, good enough with Tyrod in charge leading them at quarterback?
I think it just comes down to the schedule. Like, how many easy matchups or easier matchups do they have that can allow Tyrod to win games? And the fact is, in 6 of their first 9 games out the gates, they play the Bengals, Panthers, Jets, Dolphins, Jaguars, and Raiders. Teams we don't have much confidence in. So I think the schedule sets up really well for Tyrod, at least through that week 9 bye.
I am sort of the opinion that they're just going to throw Justin Herbert into the fire.
Interesting.
But maybe I should focus more on my own like COVID skepticism, and maybe the offseason will just make it impossible. But I mean, Tyrod, one of the more underrated players in the NFL over the past decade. But yeah, I mean, you don't view him as a ceiling player. You view him as like kind of someone you put into an already contending roster that can guide the roster through the regular season. But yeah, I think this is going to unfortunately be kind of a stuck in neutral year for an otherwise extremely talented Chargers roster, even with kind of league average play from Tyrod or just very below average play from Justin Herbert, who is not an impressive prospect to me.
You know, I mentioned when we were talking about the Houston Texans that they had a negative point differential, scoring 7 fewer points last regular season. The Los Angeles Chargers only had 1 fewer point the entire, like they had a negative point differential of just 8 the entire year. Yet again, the Texans went 10-6. The Chargers went 5-11. Like, I know that's not.
What can Phillip Rivers do for you? I mean, that is really Phillip Rivers boiled down to his bare essentials.
It's not perfectly indicative of, you know, a full season outcome and game by game outcome, but it does show the difference between 10-6 and 5-11 in the end might not be drastically different. But as Daigle mentioned, the start of their season, you need to have a winning record. You need to be 4-2 in those 5 or 6 games or however many he mentioned, because if not, and Tyrod is your quarterback and Justin Herbert comes in, then you've wasted your entire season. And Pat, I'm with you. Like, we see it so often that earlier and earlier, these quarterbacks are coming in and starting right away. I'm of the opinion that Justin Herbert needs time, but who am I to say that? I've been wrong plenty of times before, and maybe he is the one, Hayden, who can maximize all these great offensive talents, because there's tons of great ones on this team.
I unfortunately think we're going to see a very conservative Chargers offense this year. In Buffalo, Tyrod only had 28 pass attempts, 201 passing yards. Of course, Phillip Rivers last year had 37 pass attempts. So it's almost a 10 pass attempts difference. And Tyrod Taylor has like one of the NFL's career best interception rates. He's like at like 1.4%, something that is kind of going under the radar. I think that Anthony Lynn's going to say, hey, look, we have a solid foundation of underneath passers, Keenan Allen, Hunter Henry, Austin Eckler. We have a strong defense, and I'm not completely sold on Tyrod Taylor. Let's just play it very conservatively. Let's have a slow pace, check down, and then let our defense try to win some games.
That translates to me as relying on your team to stay healthy and having the ball bounce in your favor in close game situations, both scenarios where the Chargers have absolutely been destroyed in recent years, which that to me makes me
You're
very
saying
fearful.
they want to be the Tennessee Titans.
Kind of. In my team preview, I wrote the Chargers. I called it one of the most fragile team offenses in the league this year. Things can go poorly, even though I love Tyrod Taylor. I love all these surrounding pieces. I'm just a little bit nervous that the game plan is going to be just too fragile.
A secondary acceptable question would have been who leads the team in targets, since Keenan Allen is also playing without Phillip Rivers for the first time in his career.
Keenan Allen leads his team in targets. I still think so.
I think it's much closer than you think.
To who? Like Austin Eckler?
Justin Jackson.
Why not Mike Williams?
No. I don't think Mike
Williams doesn't lead in targets. He can lead in production easily.
Yeah, there's a big difference though. Like
Okay,
I don't think Mike
fair.
Williams is like a target vacuum.
One little split I saw, Keenan Allen's targets dropped from 11 to 8.3 with Hunter Henry in the lineup last year. I think 8.3 is probably the ceiling for Keenan Allen this year with Tyrod Taylor. It's probably going to be closer to about 7 targets a game, I think.
Gentlemen, we did it. We went around the AFC. All 6 teams asked one burning question. If you enjoyed this podcast at all and you're checking us out on YouTube, go and subscribe on any one of your podcast platforms, Stitcher, Spotify, iTunes. We're on all of them. Check us out on all of them. Why not all 3 and download us? Rate and reviews. It certainly does help us out. Telling one friend as well. We'll be back.
Use those affiliate links from all the Amazon products and the LED lights.
We'll be back on Friday by taking a tour of the NFC. Again, one burning question for every single NFC team. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me. Up the Villa. We'll talk to you soon. See ya.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.